Okay, the 2 minutes are over, so let's start with our expert discussion. Welcome at this expert meeting on nuclear sharing and disarmament. My name is Jamila Schäfer. I'm member of the executive committee of the Green Party, and I'm the today's moderator of this panel discussion. In our party program, we as Greens support the Treaty of the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And we think that this is one of the crucial disarmament debates that we have to focus on. So we are going to discuss today how can we create the requirements and can win the allies for nuclear disarmament on the international level. And as we are not only as a party working on this issue, and also our Green group in the parliament is working on these questions of nuclear disarmament for a long time, I'm very happy to welcome my co-host for this expert discussion today, Katja Keul. She's our spokesperson for nuclear disarmament, and not only nuclear disarmament, but for disarmament in general in the Green group in the German Bundestag. And I'm also happy to welcome Frank Meeussen. He's the diplomatic advisor to the Vice Prime Minister and Minister of Mobility in the Belgian government. Welcome to join us today for the Belgian debate. And we also welcome Leo Hoffmann-Axthelm. He is disarmament activist from ICAN and has a perfect perspective of the international debate and the civil society debate on this question. And I'm also very happy to hear your insights from the debate on the international level. Welcome, Leo. And yeah, we are going to discuss crucial questions among the panelists at first. And afterwards, I'm going to open the discussion also for questions from you as an audience. So you can already think about, while our panelists are talking, which questions you want to ask them. And you just write the questions in the chat, and I'm going to give them to the panel after our first part. And this meeting will also be live streamed on YouTube. You can also get the link from this Zoom call. And also we are going to have a YouTube link from the whole discussion afterwards that you can look up whenever you want to, and you can of course forward it also to other interested persons who were not able to join the debate today. So welcome again, and I'm directly going to open up the debate to our panelists. Frank Meeussen, I'm going to ask you at first about the question, what is the current status of the nuclear disarmament debate in Belgium? What can you give us, which insights can you give us from the Belgian debate on that topic?
Thank you, Jamila, and thank you, Katja. So first I have to say that I will not speak on behalf of the Belgian government. I will speak as a member of the Flemish Green Party since I was counting 29 years now, and also as somebody with expertise in arms control. So there are three things that I would like to touch upon. First, the general context. Secondly, the role and the position of the Greens in this debate, and then thirdly about what we have achieved in Belgium so far. But maybe this last part I will keep for the second part. So first, of course, we agree that the consequences of the use, accidental or intentional, of nuclear weapons are catastrophic and unacceptable. The only way to get rid of this risk is to get rid of nuclear weapons as a whole. And therefore, nuclear disarmament should be a top priority also for the survival of our species. In fact, it's as important as halting climate change. So the situation now that we are in today is that there is an increased risk for nuclear arms races, so for increasing the number of nuclear weapons. We see an increase in in arsenals and also in types of nuclear weapons. We also see the crumbling of treaties, like, of course, the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, the ABM, the INF, the Open Skies, GCPOA. And then we see also the development of increased missile defense capacities, leading to countermeasures like hypersonic missiles and also increased arsenals, like, for example, the increased ceiling of the UK arsenals, One of the reasons mentioned by the UK Ministry of Defense was the increased Russian capacities of missile defense. So, but even without a new arms race, the current status quo of 14,000 nuclear warheads is neither safe nor sustainable. So it's not safe because the risk of miscalculation, accidents, and so on. And it's not sustainable because the refusal by nuclear weapon states to reduce their arsenals will finally undermine the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and it will irrefutably lead to more states aspiring to obtain nuclear weapons. So, but at the same time, we need to understand, especially we Greens, that disarmament is not a goal in itself. Our objective should be security, safety, peace, and stability. And ill-considered disarmament that is insufficiently balanced or insufficiently verified can risks leading to less security, and it can even be an incentive for conflict. Now, in the current context, I mentioned the risks, but there are also some positive evolutions. So 2021 offers a relatively favorable context. There is the extension of the New START by the US administrations and Russia, the possible reboot of the Iran deal, the GCPOA. There is fortunately a new administration in the US with a President Biden, that really knows this topic very well, which could facilitate courageous policy choices. Among the nuclear weapon states, there seems to be a growing support for a new comprehensive nuclear arms control treaty, not only covering the strategic warheads, but also all kinds of warheads, and possibly also involving other nuclear weapon states. So this is an important evolution. And of course, there hopefully will be new coalitions in Germany, but also the new Dutch coalition could be more favorable towards nuclear disarmament. And in Belgium, we also have a coalition that is more keen on nuclear disarmament than the one before. And we have currently an ongoing dialogue between the Greens in Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium on nuclear disarmament. So if you allow me, on the positions I will speak for the Belgian Greens, so for Ecolo and Groen. So, of course, how can the Greens contribute to nuclear disarmament, given that we have political responsibility in European countries that are non-nuclear weapon states, but at the same time also NATO member states involved in nuclear sharing? First, I must underline that the Belgian Greens are not, so we are not in favor of total unilateral disarmament. We do not believe that Europe or the world would be safer if, for example, all three NATO nuclear weapon states would totally abolish their nuclear arsenals without similar measures from the other nuclear weapon states. So I guess on this, we're like most other political parties. What makes us different from other political parties is that we are in favor of unilateral reductions. We are prepared to take a first step, even when the adversary does not follow suit immediately. We believe that unilateral reductions can contribute to a context that is favorable to new nuclear arms control and disarmament initiatives. Some might call this naive. I would say there is a risk of naivety on both sides. It's also naive to think that the current status quo is sustainable. And it's also naive to think that you can achieve sustainable security by military dominance, threat, and force. We Europeans have learned this the hard way, if I can say so. So on joining the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Ban Treaty, the current central and agreed role of nuclear weapons in NATO's defensive posture is, of course, hard to reconcile with the Ban Treaty. Hence, joining the Ban Treaty as a NATO member in the current context would be difficult to obtain from coalition partners, and also because it would at least give the impression of a position in favor of total unilateral disarmament. But this is from a logical point of view. And as we are in politics, politics work in a different way. In politics, the shortest line between A and B is often not a straight line. So in political logic, it makes a lot of sense to promote joining the TPNW. In politics, you need concrete topics, handgriffe, I think in German, like nuclear sharing and the Ban Treaty, to advance your case. In a coalition agreement, a commitment on nuclear disarmament without a handgriff risks ending in nothing. In that sense, the TPNW is an excellent political tool to advance nuclear disarmament. And concretely, we want our governments to recognize, the Belgian government, to recognize the risk associated with the current status quo, that our government understands the impatience of the slow progress in nuclear disarmament that led to the Ban Treaty, and that we speak and act in a way with a view to build a bridge between the nuclear weapon states, their allies, and the non-nuclear weapon states, the TPNW states parties. And we also think that our government and NATO should stop bad-mouthing and speaking very negatively about the Ban Treaty, and that we should also welcome the entry into force of the Ban Treaty as a strong signal from 122 countries, a lot of countries, as a signal to nuclear weapon states, to and their allies, including us, to make more and faster work on nuclear disarmament. So very concretely, in Belgium, we advocate to reconsider the Belgian no vote in the United Nations General Assembly on the resolution on the TPNW. We advocate that Belgium would participate as an observer state in the first meeting of states parties of the Ban Treaty in January 22. And we also want Belgium to join the Stockholm Initiative, which is, in our view, a good dialogue platform between nuclear weapon states, their allies, and TPNW supporters. And then on nuclear sharing, and then I will end this part. So Belgium and Germany and Netherlands are not nuclear weapon states, but so as such, we cannot initiate a nuclear disarmament talks, negotiations ourselves. But as a very visible and concrete demonstration of our commitment to nuclear disarmament, we can halt nuclear sharing. Thereby also clearing our ambiguous position of an NPT member state, non-nuclear member state, that has nuclear weapons on our territory. Hereby, it is important to underline that halting nuclear sharing, stopping nuclear sharing, can nor should be considered as unilateral nuclear disarmament. It's a reduction, but it's not disarmament. Our countries would remain under the US nuclear umbrella, just like the other 22 NATO member states that do not possess nuclear weapons. Nor do participate in nuclear sharing. So we also should endeavor that NATO in the 22 summit reduces the role of nuclear weapons in its defense posture. But this is what we can do, in our situation. On top of that, of course, we should continue to encourage nuclear weapon states to engage in negotiations, encourage also the so-called P5 dialogue between the 5 nuclear weapon states, which is a very important forum to advance, to build confidence. also with a view to this new treaty, this post-New START treaty, this comprehensive nuclear arms control treaty. Of course, we should publicly advocate reductions and, also protest when arsenals are increased. We should discourage the development and placement of new types of nuclear weapons. We should continue to participate, like Belgium and Germany and Netherlands are doing, in the US-led international partnership for nuclear disarmament verification. And of course, we should promote the comprehensive test ban treaty. Finally, I think it's very important because now the risk is that, there's the Greens talking about nuclear weapons, and then there are some diplomats and military. In the 80s, 50 years ago, all top politicians were very much aware of the risks and everything. But now this is this has somehow vanished. There are very few top politicians who are really, really aware and have knowledge. And this is a risky situation because it's an extremely important topic. So we should especially talk about it, not only among ourselves. And also, in order to talk about it, you need transparency. There needs to be more transparency. This whole thing about deny nor confirm should end. I mean, there are nuclear weapons. They are an existential threat to humankind. We need to talk about it. We need to enter into dialogue. I'm not saying that the Greens, that we have all the wisdom there is on this topic, but we need to open up a dialogue and listen to each other in order to avoid a very big disaster. And I will end right here.
Thank you so much for this broad remark on the topic. Now I'm going to hand over to Katja. What can you tell us about the German debate? And where do you see the current opportunities that the ban treaty has already opened, which also Frank has mentioned? But which obstacles do you see on the other hand, and how do you see the German role in this discussion right now?
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that Frank has started by saying what the risks and the dangers again are today, because I think we have, it's been underestimated in the public debate how high the risk of accidental nuclear escalation actually is. And so that is something that has changed in the German public debate, especially in the last 10 years, because when we think back in 2010, we had a resolution taken in the Bundestag together with CDU, with FDP, all across the sides to end nuclear sharing and to have the nuclear arms retrieved from German territory, while now 10 years later, the debate has completely shifted. So the mainstream is saying nuclear deterrence is really important, is really existential. So everybody is back in kind of a Cold War logic now, which makes it a lot harder for us Greens to lead in the debate than it was 10 years ago. So this is the first thing I think is important to remind people of the humanitarian and ecological consequences of a nuclear escalation. Sometimes I have the impression people think it makes a difference whether it's 300 kilometers or 400 kilometers or 500 kilometers. It's a disaster anywhere on European territory if we have a nuclear escalation, that's for sure. So this is one of the biggest challenges, I think. The first challenge is to remind people of the actual situation of the risk. Especially because of the technology, Frank has mentioned it. So here we are in a difficult situation. On the other hand, many experts are very aware that the sub-strategic weapons in Germany, the B-61 gravity bombs, actually don't really have a military scenario, a really military function. It's more a political symbol because there is actually no scenario how to defend anybody by having pilots fly B-61 bombs towards the east and drop them somewhere. You cannot defend somebody by actually destroying them, which is a threat that we are very aware of. So it is more a political thing we have to talk about, but not really a military. And then in Germany, a lot of times people have the look at the nuclear sharing as if it's something that we owe to the United States, that we let their bombs be on our territory, which actually is a little bit weird, because when we talk to the American side, they're saying, for us Americans, these B-61 are not really relevant. It's, we're doing this in favor for you Europeans. So if we have a problem with that, so maybe you should talk among each others to clear the situation. So it's not really anything the United States rely on, but it shows that it is to us Europeans really to talk with each others. But still, of course, the nuclear sharing is an issue when it comes to looking at the TPNW, because, of course, we cannot sign it or support it as long as we are part of a nuclear sharing arrangement. But the TPNW, of course, we as German Greens see it as a positive sign, as a political step to make things go ahead. So just as Frank said, we don't want to have this, you call it bad mouthing about the TPNW, have a more, positive attitude to it, try to get an observer statute for the first review conference, something like that. And then, of course, we have to see at the setting and all, and try to have like a roadmap towards ending nuclear sharing. And if we have such a roadmap, then it would also be possible to join the TPNW, but that would be the second step, and the first would be the observer statute. And then there's a really positive development coming from Washington, from the Biden administration, who are very clear that they want to reduce their reliance on nuclear deterrence, and that they want to start stability talks with the Russian side, and that they want to talk about all nuclear weapons, not only strategic, but also sub-strategic, which, of course, is to us very important. And as I see it right now, the German debate is far behind the Washington debate. So, like the Biden administration is asking Europeans, what do you think we are thinking about sole purpose? Would you support us doing it? And there's no real answer. I haven't heard any clear answer from the German government yet. So there's a very positive dynamic coming from Washington. And I think it's very important that as Greens and as a German government, which hopefully will be one and the same thing pretty soon, that it's important not to miss to support this dynamic and not to kind of stain our internal debates and missing the great picture that's happening, because of course that's a big chance if we have American and Russian talks about sub-strategic weapons. That's when nuclear sharing also comes on the table. I mean, not the first second, but if they open it and say, well, let's talk about everything, the Russians are going to want to talk about missile defense. The Americans want to talk about the intermediate range missiles. So we have to make sure that we make the point and say, yes, we support this, and we want to have the sub-strategic weapons on the table and the nuclear sharing on the table, and we support, negotiating something, because the best result would be to have, of course, less nuclear sub-strategic weapons on both sides, which means to get the Russians to reduce their sub-strategic weapons and have it like Kaliningrad as a nuclear-free zone would be a lot more, in my view, give a lot more security also to the Baltic states and our eastern neighbors than continuing to invest and modernize on both sides. So far.
Thanks a lot, Katja. I mean, you said now it has become more difficult to justify the sense of nuclear disarmament in the German debate. And also Frank said that there's less and less discussion about it in the general public in Belgium. So Leo, as a part of a civil society who has driven this crucial impulse for disarmament on the international level that also Katja has mentioned right now, would you share the impression that it's less difficult or it's more difficult to justify the sense of nuclear disarmament, or is there more this momentum if you look at this bigger international picture?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, and indeed for organizing this event and bringing together Greens from various NATO countries. I think this is extremely crucial to really have a new format where indeed European countries talk together and the Greens try to work together also across member states to see how we can move NATO on nuclear weapons policy. And indeed, the question is very relevant since the 1990s. Nuclear weapons have been sort of forgotten. People thought that they had disappeared alongside the Cold War. And now we're discovering that they are still very much here. There's tensions in Europe. There's tensions in the relationship with Russia. And of course, also the years with Trump have brought nuclear weapons very much to the fore. So indeed, I think these are all in a way also helpful in bringing the nuclear debate, making it a bit more transparent and a bit more honest. And certainly from the perspective of ICAN, I can say that for us, the main element for reinvigorating the debate on nuclear weapons has been the fact that the majority of countries of the planet have come together to negotiate a United Nations treaty categorically prohibiting nuclear weapons and making it crystal clear what the majority of states thinks about nuclear weapons, and providing a tool to make them illegal under international law and undermine their legitimacy. Now, of course, this is only a tool. This is the first step. Now we have to use the tool in order to indeed reduce the role of nuclear weapons in our own security architecture. And for NATO member states, of course, this means talking about their own reliance on weapons of mass destruction and the fact that NATO still threatens to use weapons of mass destruction 24/7, 365 days a year in order to, because they believe that they need this for their own security. Now, of course, most countries on the planet do not have this strategy. All other countries except NATO and the 9 nuclear armed states do not see a need for nuclear weapons. They are not being threatened with nuclear weapons. So they are the perfect example of how you can perfectly organize your national security without relying on weapons of mass destruction. I think this is something that maybe people who tend to see the world through the lens of a superpower, or who tend to see the world only from the perspective of NATO, maybe forget that the rest of the world has a very different approach to nuclear weapons. And luckily, our populations in NATO countries very much share that approach. So whichever survey you look at, 70, 80, 90% of European citizens are opposed to nuclear weapons and want their countries to join this treaty. Now, coming back to nuclear sharing and the status quo that we are faced with, I think it's been said that acknowledging the risks of nuclear weapons is really crucial in this debate. And one example on this is that indeed Germany is still not acknowledging how many nuclear weapons are stationed in Germany and where. And this is the same in Italy, it's the same in Belgium and the Netherlands. And of course, ensuring transparency is the very first step, because frankly, the citizens of Rhineland-Pfalz, of Rhineland-Palatinate have a right to know that weapons of mass destruction are stationed in their backyard. Because quite frankly, if something goes wrong in Moscow in the command and control structure, if there's another miscommunication between ministries, then the result might well be that part of Germany is wiped out. So these people have a right to know about these threats, because indeed there was never any sort of transparency or democratic decision in favor of such arrangements. Now, since the Stockholm Initiative was mentioned, I want to make a little parallel, open a parable on that, insofar as Germany is asking other nuclear armed states to create transparency on their nuclear arsenals. And yet they don't create transparency on their own nuclear weapons on their territory. And this just goes to show how the entire Stockholm Initiative is, a great list of things that should be done. But and we support each and every step of the Stockholm Initiative. But you don't get to call it an initiative if these steps have been endorsed multiple times by all members of the NPT more than 20 years ago and have still not been implemented. That's not an initiative. That's just an approach that is likely to prolong the status quo while creating the impression that you're doing something so as to make sure that you can basically keep playing for time and not bring forward nuclear disarmament. So we are extremely critical of the Stockholm Initiative because it allows politicians to hide behind this perception that something is happening when actually none of the elements of the Stockholm Initiative has any likelihood whatsoever of bringing us forward. So I think this is just a complete waste of time. Of course, nuclear sharing makes you a target. I mean, this is something that I think we have to acknowledge. There's not just this hope that maybe by getting rid of nuclear sharing, you might be able to extract some concessions from the Russians. It's also just the fact that nuclear sharing makes you a target. So getting rid of nuclear sharing is going to increase security, right? Yes, as long as nuclear weapons exist anywhere in the world, they will be a threat, of course. But nevertheless, you are more threatened if you have nuclear weapons in your own backyard because it makes you a target. So this also means for those countries that do have nuclear weapons that there is something they can do, right? They don't have to just give up and say, oh, it's going to be impossible to reach a nuclear global zero. It's going to be impossible to get all nuclear armed states to agree. Yes, that might be difficult, but nevertheless, there's something that they can do right now. And they should really, countries like Belgium, Germany, Italy, should really focus on the things that they themselves can do rather than constantly calling on other countries to do something. Just to get a few facts in about nuclear sharing and withdrawing of nuclear sharing, there are examples in the past where nuclear sharing has been terminated. So in Greece, for example, in 2001, nuclear sharing was terminated and the nuclear weapons were withdrawn. The same happened in Canada and also in the United Kingdom. And those were fairly uncontroversial moments, of course. And also at the moment in Turkey, they are massively reducing the number of nuclear weapons in Turkey, unilaterally, I should add, because here it's a matter of lack of trust with the Turkish government and Turkish military, also because the base was in Incirlik, was isolated during the coup attempt there a few years ago. If I have just 1 minute to go, I want to go into some of the most popular counter arguments that we are having to deal with when discussing these things, because I think it's important to address the misinformation that is out there in order to be, for us to be more effective in getting through with our points. One counter argument is that they will simply go to Poland or somewhere else in Eastern Europe. Now, this is a very difficult argument to sustain, and I'm surprised that it's also still so popular in the debate, because if you want to station those nuclear weapons in Poland, you will actually first have to withdraw from the NATO-Russia Founding Act on Mutual Relations from 1997. And honestly, I do not see President Biden trashing the next multilateral agreement with Russia. That's simply not going to happen. Rather, they will completely do away with tactical nukes in Europe, but they will not bring them to Eastern Europe. This is simply beyond what is thinkable. Another thing that I perhaps mentioned in a different shape is that, of course, you shouldn't wait for Russia to make equivalent promises, because simply you should not give Russia a veto over your own defense postures. NATO countries themselves should decide whether they want nuclear weapons in Europe and shouldn't wait for Russia to agree to that. And then another counter argument that I think is very popular is that nuclear sharing states have a particularly heavy influence on nuclear weapons policy within NATO and would lose the seat at the table if they were to withdraw their nukes from Germany or Belgium. And I think this is, it's just a cute assumption, really, that European policymakers would have a seat at the table when it comes to setting nuclear weapons policy for NATO, because that is unilaterally set by the United States. Obviously, I mean, they have the nukes, they decide what they do with it. And so also nobody ever told all the other NATO states that they have a second rank or a third class membership in NATO, right? So everybody has the same kind of influence on nuclear weapons policy. And then thirdly, I would also just turn around the question and ask, well, where was this influence that you claim you have in the past? Where was this influence when the United States was withdrawing from one arms control agreement after the other? Where was this influence when the United States are developing new and smaller nuclear weapons so as to make them more usable? And this is something that was done before Trump. Where is this influence when it comes to the United States saying that they will use nuclear weapons also in more scenarios, including potentially against hacker attacks, against large infrastructure, and including against attacks that are not done via nuclear weapons, as they have said in the last nuclear posture review? And finally, if they have any influence inside of these forums, then you will also have to ask, why is it that you still have these first use policies? Why does the United States explicitly reserve the right for itself to use nuclear weapons first instead of using them only as deterrents? Because it should be added that this flies in the face of the argument of NATO that nuclear weapons are only for defensive purposes and only for deterrence, given that first use is fundamentally incompatible with the claim that they are only for deterrence. So the fact that NATO countries are completely silent on all of these issues creates the undeniable impression that they are simply in agreement with these policies. And therefore, it would be all the more important for NATO countries to find a way to tell the general public and tell nuclear policymakers and nuclear armed states that they may not agree with some of these policies and some of these developments. Voila, this is it on the status quo, and I hope we get another opportunity to speak about the tools and opportunities for the future that we have with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Leo, also for debunking a few myths. Maybe to come to the point, what would be the concrete steps to make nuclear disarmament possible? Frank, you also mentioned it yourself. We Greens are often accused of naivety on the issue of nuclear disarmament. But of course, it's clear that we are not only thinking about the vision of a world free of nuclear weapons, but also about very concrete steps that are possible in order to enable that goal. So what are those steps in your eyes, and also maybe from the Belgian perspective?
Yes, so I've already spoken about what the Belgian Greens want when it comes to nuclear sharing and TPNW, the ban treaty. So indeed, maybe I will now explain, so what is the result, what has been the impact in Belgian policy since the new government where the Greens are in since September last year. Because of course we obtained in the government agreement, we did not obtain a reference to the ending of nuclear sharing, but we obtained a reference to the ban treaty. So the government agreement, it says that so Belgium will play a proactive role in the 2021 NPT review conference, and it will work with European NATO allies, will explore how to strengthen the multilateral non-proliferation network, and how the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons can give new impetus to a multilateral nuclear disarmament. So that's a very neutral reference, but the fact that the word is in the government agreement is already something. So what was the impact so far? So far, not so good. So Belgium has repeated its no vote in the UN General Assembly. There were also some communications by the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also there was the NATO statement on TPNW on 15 December last year that said we collectively reiterate our opposition to this treaty. So this was also not very good. On the more positive side, there was a statement by the Belgian Minister of Foreign Affairs at the Conference of Disarmament in Geneva, then chaired by Belgium, really putting a lot of focus on the importance of nuclear disarmament. So, but what is our strategy? Of course, we already obtained within our government majority that Belgium will play a bridge building role during the NPT review conference towards the states parties of the BAM treaty in its statements, but also with the help of side events, and also we're looking at a study on how the BAM treaty can give new impetus to multilateral nuclear disarmament, and Belgium has actively connected with the Stockholm Initiative. This is as such, it is what it is, but we are also, for the near future, we're looking at a change in the vote of Belgium in the UN General Assembly on the TPNW resolution. And we're also looking, of course, at the Belgian participation as observer in the state party meeting of the BAM treaty. But this is something that we're still, discussing about. And then on nuclear sharing, this is a battle that we want to continue, but we will need the subsequent government, I think, to achieve this. And of course, so how are we endeavoring all this? Well, it's first, through dialogue within the majority, and I must say that, for example, the Flemish Socialist Party is also on our side, but also the French-speaking Socialist Party also a bit. So it's not that the Greens are isolated on this topic in the Belgian government. And at the same time, we're investing, of course, like here today, in our dialogue with fellow Green parties in countries with a similar status, the Netherlands, Germany, but also Luxembourg, on how to proceed. And we are keeping a very close eye also on the discussions within NATO. And this is possible also through this in Belgium, in the Belgian government. Each government party has a vice prime minister and a special cabinet that allows this vice prime minister to keep an eye on all the other competences. So two Green vice prime ministers, I work for the Ecolo vice prime minister, but there's also a Groen, Flemish Green vice prime minister. We are really investing. So that's the instrument, let's say, for us in the Belgian federal government to follow this topic from close by. And I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Frank. Katja, what do you think would be the concrete steps that the German government, that might be also a government that we as a Green Party could belong to in the future, would have to take in order to make it possible to join this armament treaty?
Well, first of all, we have to reach the point where our Belgian friends already are, which means now we're concentrating on our campaign and trying to get as much support as we can for the Green position. And we should also use the campaign, as I said at the beginning, to focus also on the humanitarian and ecological consequences of nuclear escalation, which means also try to get in touch more with, or not to get in touch, but to try to communicate also to the young movement and to Fridays for Future to show them that there is another danger for climate that comes from these weapons, to make it more relevant in the campaign issues. And even before our elections, there will probably be the NPT review conference in August. This is, as far as I know, it still hasn't been postponed further, so it will take place in August. And of course, we have to use that and make sure and ask our government to focus on building bridges towards the TPNW supporting countries on the NPT review conference to make sure it doesn't fail. And as far as I see, we need, if we have the opportunity as a Green coalition partner, of course, the first will be the coalition treaty. And Frank has mentioned how things worked out in Belgium, but of course we need to try to have a clear message in the coalition treaty, which of course depends very much on what kind of coalition partner we are going to deal with. So if we have to deal with the conservatives, of course it will be very difficult, but I think they know how essential this topic is to us Greens. It is our DNA since the 80s. So they need to know that they have to do something about it. It can just not be nothing. So I would appreciate to see, as our Belgian friends made it, have a at least neutral or more likely positive language about the ban treaty, to see, not to say that we'll support it right away, but to say we'll see it as a positive signal. That already, I think, would be a step ahead, and we should really also try to catch up really with what is happening on the post-New START process between Russia and the United States, and welcome that sub-strategic weapons are going to be on the table. So that would be a signal towards nuclear sharing, because that would be a process. I don't think we can, focus on unilateral. I agree with Frank. A unilateral termination of nuclear sharing right now might even be counterproductive, because it might be a good idea to leave that on the table when it comes to having a more broader global or bilateral treaty between the two big ones. It might be a good idea to have the nuclear sharing question on the table. So. And I think that's important to make that clear. And as I said, we need to support what is happening. I mean, this is unbelievable that the German government is kind of staying backwards while Washington is asking, what do you think of sole purpose? Is that okay for you? If we declare sole purpose, it's not quite first use, but it sounds very similar to no first use. And they don't get an answer. So I think, as a Green government partner, the first thing would be that we give a clear answer and say, yeah, we support that. We definitely want it. And so this is the first steps I see. Oh, and as I mentioned in the beginning, we should really try to get the observer state statute in the coalition treaty. I think that would be a very, very important sign.
Thank you so much, Katja. Leo, do you want to add something on that question of direct steps? And also maybe you can already give us an outlook on the most important alliance partners that are able to win for this path and these concrete steps that Katja and Frank mentioned.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, of course, we have very specific ideas about the steps that can and should be taken right now. And indeed, the goal should be really to get NATO to discuss its nuclear deterrence policies. And I think it's a good moment to do that. I mean, we have a new US administration. We have soon a new governing coalition in Germany. And at the same time, there will be the kickoff of a debate for a new strategic concept of NATO. But we also, of course, have to acknowledge that any attempt so far of getting NATO to actually debate its reliance on nuclear deterrence has failed. It actually, I mean, it hasn't failed. It has actively been avoided. And why has NATO avoided these debates systematically? Well, obviously, because they fear the outcome of such a debate when you do it too openly and too publicly, because the lack of transparency around nuclear weapons is, of course, something that comes from the supporters of nuclear weapons, who are well aware that nuclear weapons will never be a source of cohesion, and that you will never have a democratic majority in favor of retaining weapons of mass destruction. So it's not easy to get this debate going, but we definitely have to try. And so far, of course, many governments have said, well, we would like to end nuclear sharing. It's been tried 10 years ago with Foreign Minister Westerwelle in Germany. And even that was not enough to get such a debate going, right? So we have to think about how can we make sure that such a debate really happens this time around. Perhaps setting a clear timeline, saying that we want to withdraw nukes within this legislature. So within the next 4 or 5 years, it's also a reasonable time frame to actually get this done in practice. So giving a clear timeline is probably going to be quite helpful in instigating such a debate. And the other tool that, of course, we have at our disposal for this is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, because there is momentum towards this treaty, and because we have many states within NATO that are eyeing this treaty with quite a lot of interest and are basically trying to gather the courage, gather the momentum to make first steps towards this treaty. And so the one thing I wanted to say, just for clarity, is, of course, you can join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear even while you are still a nuclear sharing state. The treaty will then give you timelines. You will have to negotiate an accession protocol with the existing state parties, and this will stipulate timelines in which you will have to get rid of the nuclear sharing and also opt out from nuclear deterrence, right? But that's just on the technical level. On the political level, I think we really have to build on what Frank and Katja have said so far. The crucial element is really that Belgium was the first country within NATO to anchor such a fairly positive statement on the TPNW in their coalition agreement. And this is something that we can build on right now. I mean, if you're going to mention the TPNW in your coalition agreement, are you really going to boycott the first meeting of state parties of that treaty? So I think Belgium really has an opportunity here to be a first mover, given that on the basis of this coalition agreement, it will be almost impossible not to be an observer. But it would be very beneficial and very helpful for other NATO countries if Belgium were to early on announce that Belgium was going to participate in this conference, given that this is going to be really helpful for other NATO states who may want to join this conference, but have not so far had the courage or the opportunity to say so. Germany will not be able to help in this regard because the coalition government will come together too late. And therefore, in October, I think Germany will no longer be able to be a first mover. Give a bit of context, Sweden, Switzerland, and Finland have already said fairly clearly that they will join the first conference in January of 2022 in Vienna. And of course, also Austria, Malta, and Ireland have already ratified the treaty, so they will certainly be in Vienna as well. Coming back to Germany, very clear language indeed in the Green Manifesto on the TPNW. I know that there is some doubt here and there about the timelines as well, given that Germany has so far been able to claim that they support nuclear weapons and at this support nuclear disarmament, and at the same time try to make sure that the Prohibition Treaty doesn't come along and try to boycott the treaty and try to dissuade other countries from doing anything on nuclear disarmament. So the space for this cognitive dissonance is quite big in the field of nuclear diplomacy, and therefore we will tend to want very clear commitments. But I think that the Green Manifesto is quite categorical in the intention to join this treaty, and so the discussion is more about timelines and intermediate steps. Coming to the perspective of NATO, because of course this is the most important point, is really how does it play with allies, and how can we make sure that the political cost of any moves to join the treaty are as small as possible, right? And of course it's normal for NATO itself to claim that it's impossible to join this treaty in order to make it easier for NATO member states to justify domestically why they are staying away from this very popular treaty. It was the same on cluster munitions. It was the same on even chemical weapons before they were banned. And it was the same on landmines until, of course, the first countries joined us, and then it's fine. The NATO treaty itself is silent on nuclear weapons. And indeed, two former NATO Secretaries General, Willy Claes and Javier Solana, have called on all NATO states to join this treaty, as well as altogether 56 prime ministers, presidents, foreign ministers, and defense ministers from NATO countries. So these are all very serious people who are not going to blow up NATO. Nevertheless, they want their countries to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I always say, for NATO, it's just not a good public relations strategy to tie your destiny to weapons of mass destruction, because in the long run, they will not be able to get 30 democracies to collectively boycott the prohibition treaty of nuclear weapons. This will not be possible, and therefore NATO should get their act together and start to flexibilize extended nuclear deterrence policies so as to accommodate those states who want to opt out from nuclear deterrence practices. On opt-outs, there's one thing I want to say. There's plenty of precedent for that. Since the 1950s, there have been lots of opt-outs from countries like Denmark on statements on nuclear weapons. Norway, Iceland, Denmark, Spain, Lithuania all have provisions that ban nuclear weapons from their territories. Really, this treaty is not the first time that there would be opt-outs from nuclear policy within NATO. And then I just wanted to say a few things about the positive consequences that one would see once that we have gathered the courage to make the step into the unknown, which is that, of course, joining the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons does not mean that the United States will unilaterally give up its nuclear weapons, right? This will still be up to the United States. We will simply delegitimize the concept of threatening nuclear weapons. And we will take some arguments away that the United States are using in order to justify their retention, and also the levels, the numbers of nuclear weapons that they still have. The second thing that should be said is that, of course, this does not mean that you would opt out from conventional deterrence. On the contrary, if you opt out from nuclear deterrence, then of course you would have a stronger focus on conventional deterrence, which is also a lot more credible when you are trying to reassure your Eastern European allies, who have understandably a very different threat perception from other countries in Western Europe. So this is also about credibility. Conventional deterrence is going to be a lot more useful for reassuring Eastern allies than the manifestly unusable nuclear weapons that are lying around in Europe. So these are the main elements on that. And of course, once a handful of NATO countries have joined this treaty and have opted out from nuclear deterrence, the most important implication is that it will chip away at the taboo around questioning the value of nuclear deterrence, right? It will enable a new debate on the costs and benefits of nuclear deterrence. It will enable think tanks and nuclear armed states who currently don't have the courage to openly discuss the pros and cons of nuclear deterrence, will enable them to just have a fresh look on the empirical evidence. And there's plenty of empirical evidence on the value of deterrence, on the risks involved, on the historical number of accidents, and of course, on the humanitarian consequences of any accident that would happen with nuclear weapons. And then to come to a conclusion as to, cost-benefit analysis, whether it's really worth it to have so many nuclear weapons. And once you have this fresh thinking around the nuclear weapons going on, also in nuclear armed states, maybe we don't get to nuclear zero within a decade or 2 decades, yeah? But any step that de-emphasizes nuclear deterrence as part of security strategy, any step that reduces the number of nuclear weapons and that reduces the number of scenarios in which defense planners plan to use nuclear weapons is going to make this a safer world. And therefore, we really have to go these steps. Coming to allies, you mentioned I should already focus a bit on to build on in Europe and within NATO in getting forward this narrative. Of course, there's a few obvious ones. There's the Vatican, which is very tireless in these efforts to rid us of nuclear weapons. There's countries like Norway. In Norway, most parties are in favor of joining the TPNW, and there will be elections also in September, which the Labour Party is expected to win, and they have very positive language on the TPNW in their election manifesto. In Italy, the foreign minister has pledged to support this treaty, and we have large support also in the parliament. So it's really a matter of activating these priorities and getting into a conversation with them. In Spain, we have a government agreement where Podemos and Sanchez agreed to join the TPNW. Of course, they didn't move on that, given that there are very strong obstacles to be overcome within the bureaucracy and the foreign ministries. But nevertheless, the coalition agreement does stipulate that they supported TPNW. So it's really a matter of getting together and making sure that this is a coordinated move. In Iceland, we have fervent support from the Prime Minister for this treaty, even though the majority is missing in the parliament. Katja has already mentioned that with the Biden administration, there is a new impetus of de-emphasizing nuclear weapons, which should absolutely be taken up. And then, of course, it's just the grassroots support that is slowly building up. Sometimes it's difficult to have an overview of all the things that are happening, but just to give you a sense of it, in Germany, more than 120 cities have called on the government to sign this treaty. All of the big cities, Cologne, Hamburg, Berlin, Munich, and all of the state capitals, all 16 state capitals have joined on have called on the government to do this. 4 regions have done so. We have 625 pledge takers in Germany, out of which 167 in the federal parliament. In Italy, we also have more than 200 cities that have formally called on their government to join this treaty. So it's, I mean, cities are not in charge of foreign policy, but this just gives you a feeling for how many people are investing their time and effort into trying to overcome this seemingly impossible task of getting NATO to engage with the pros and cons of nuclear weapons. They don't want to do it. We understand why, because of the empirical evidence, which is admittedly crushing, but nevertheless, we have to discuss nuclear weapons because they are a far too dangerous topic to leave to the nuclear armed states to sort out between themselves, because they have made it clear beyond any reasonable doubt that they themselves will not reduce nuclear weapons. And we have just seen that even Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in a cheap strategy to make himself be seen as a statesman and show that post-Brexit, the UK is still relevant. He doesn't care about the strategic implications or whether you need nuclear weapons or not, but let's increase the nuclear warheads by 40% just in order to look cool. I mean, if this is the kind of reasoning on which we're going to discuss nuclear weapons, and the UK will on a whim decide to increase their weapons by 40%, I think they really need to get a bit of pushback. They need a new a reminder on where other NATO countries stand on the topic of nuclear weapons. And so these are all elements that I think would be helpful in making sure that the strategic concept that would now be discussed creates the flexibility, creates the space for such an honest debate. Thank you so much. And sorry for being long.
I would suggest that we are going now to open for the questions from our audience. And there have been a few questions also to Frank and Katja to the question, how can we ensure that there is a constructive debate also with the Americans, the Russians, and also with Poland to go these steps. Maybe, I don't know, it's like also a good question for governing countries. Maybe I will hand over to Frank and ask Katja to add the points from the German perspective.
Okay. So again, I don't speak on behalf of the Belgian government, but it's of course true. It would be fantastic if we could discuss all this in the context of the alliance and everything. But like Leo said, Belgium has brought this up 11 years ago. And so the debate lasted like 15 seconds or something. So I think, of course, optimally, all this is done in dialogue. But on the other hand, it's an extremely serious issue, and we are sovereign countries. And I think that, nuclear sharing is not essential for nuclear deterrence and also not essential for NATO, because otherwise there would be no 22 NATO countries without nuclear sharing. So I think it should be possible to end nuclear sharing even if there is no consensus within NATO. And then on the risk, so Leo, you are very optimistic about the NATO-Russia Founding Act. So it's not even a legally binding treaty. So I think there is a risk. And I think there is a serious risk that if Germany or Belgium would say we want to get rid of them, that Poland would say bring them on. Now, you should also look at this. If this would happen, you should look at it in the context of the new comprehensive treaty. It would add some leverage, so to say, on our side in the negotiations. And so it's all very, it's a very dynamic situation, but I would not, exclude unilateral ending of nuclear sharing, because otherwise I'm afraid that we need this kind of tools and handgriffen in order to really force a debate on it. Because like you say, there have been decades with no movement, and this cannot last, because sooner or later it will be too late, and when it's too late, it's really too late, and this is something we should avoid.
Thank you so much. Katja, do you want to add something?
Well, the question was about what can we do to support the Russian and American process. I think there's two different things going on, two parallel things. One is, of course, what is going on between Russia and the United States. And I think I made it clear that I think it's necessary that the German government really supports all the positive initiatives coming from Washington. But the other thing is among us Europeans, and there's a lot of homework to do for us among each other. And as we heard, there is a lot of dynamic in different countries, but we have to bring it together, because what we hear a lot in the German debate is a very national focus and saying, "Oh, you're naive. You were trying to do it unilateral. You are the only one, Deutscher Sonderweg. You're going your own way." And so I think it's really important that just as we are doing it right now, to get a Belgium and a German position together. Next time, hopefully, we'll have somebody from Lithuania, from Italy, and have a European discussion coming together to show the promoters of nuclear sharing, to show we are not alone. It's not just crazy green Germans and some crazy green Belgians, but we are the majority, and we have, people want it. And the most important thing is that we start trying to have that discussion with our Eastern neighbors. I'm not too much worried about the nuclear weapons going to Poland, because it's not that easy. And from what I hear from Washington, United States don't really have interest, in destabilizing what they're trying to start stability talks, and they don't have really an interest to destabilize by deploying nuclear weapons in Poland. So I'm not too worried about that, because that's not in the American interest. But of course, we have to discuss with the Polish civil society and try to find partners, not only where it might be easier, like in Belgium, but also where it might be harder. And it's very interesting, as Leo said, that, for example, Lithuania has a non-nuclear, it's in their constitution that they don't want nuclear weapons on their territory, which is an interesting start for a conversation about nuclear disarmament with them. And I know, as far as I heard, of course, the Eastern experts and the government representatives, they kind of say, well, when we say, well, what do you need? Why are you, we stand to Article 5 NATO, we reassure you, we are ready to defend you conventionally. Why do you believe in these B-61 bombs that will never, ever, be of any help? And so far, I found the debate not very developed. It was very, it's rather emotional than rational to say, well, they feel it's existential to them that Germany would be part of any kind of, nuclear sharing arrangement. But we have to talk about that with them and say, well, if, look at it, and if that's not really what you need, then maybe you need something else. A lot of time we are asked, are Greens willing to reinforce conventional arms to reassure our Eastern partners? And I would say, well, yeah, we can think of it, because the nuclear question is so important to us. We might be also willing to even go further and invest more, even though we have to say we are already NATO is already having a high presence. We are already investing a lot on the Eastern military presence, but we might even do more. But that can only be, plan B, because the best thing would be to have a reduction on our side and on the Russian side. So this is, for an Eastern European perspective, this is the most important, to have less tactical nuclear Russian weapons close to their border. So I think that this should be our first aim, to say, well, let's try to reduce them on both sides. And only if that's for some reason not possible, we just shouldn't give up. But then we say, okay, so we might have to do it anyway, because we Greens, we don't want, to wait for disarmament until everybody agrees. And then maybe we'll have to look at the conventional reassurance more. But that's the debate that has just, hardly started. So we still have a lot to do there. And I see that's what we should focus on. And I really hope to broaden the spectrum we have here today. And as Leo has given us a lot of reason to hope for Spain and Italy. And I think that would be a good move to, in the end up with a perspective where indeed we could say, let's have a 4 years period starting, in September, and then maybe at the end of the 4 years we'll have an answer to how terminate and how finish nuclear sharing.
Thanks a lot. I have now 3 questions that are a lot connected and are all going to Frank. So if it's okay for you, I would just put them together and give them to you, Frank. So the first question is from Angelika Clausen, and she just wants to know how much the Belgian government agrees with your position, and connected to that, Tom asked you that, and he said it's very good that the Belgian Greens see it as a priority to end nuclear sharing and present in Vienna as an observer. But are you going to convince the conservative parties in Belgium and also the opponents in NATO? So in shortcut, can you say a little bit more about the how question? And the third question, also connecting to this, is can and will Belgium push for a constructive language on the TPNW and in the context of the review of NATO's strategic concept? And would it make sense to you if the 5 NATO host nations among themselves discuss what their shared position on nuclear sharing are? Because, Oliver means it could be a useful prelude before a meeting with other 25 NATO alliance partners. So the floor is yours.
Okay. So what are we doing in the Belgian government? We're talking among the 7 coalition parties on a regular basis. And also our group in parliament is asking questions. So there is pressure. Of course, the Greens are necessary to have the majority. So in that sense, of course, at this moment, there is no need to threaten this majority because of the nuclear issue. But our partners know that for us, it's a very important topic, and that we really want results and we want impact. And if nothing moves, that's really a problem for us. So that's why we have been also discreetly among the government parties, among the cabinets of the vice prime ministers, but also with our group, and also there was a press statement, of course, the day when the ban treaty entered into force, a press statement from Ecolo and Grünen. Now, it's also important, so we need to talk about it, because of course there is a lot of caricatures and things, and that's also something I want to say to Leo. The thing is, you should avoid creating a situation that your position is the only sensible and that all the other people are crazy maniacs. because sometimes it happens. It sometimes, and this is not inducive to dialogue. And it's in fact an extremely complex topic. You know that Albert Einstein, not the stupidest person in history. So in 38, he wrote a letter to Roosevelt, you have to construct a nuclear weapon. And then 5 years later, he wrote a letter, stop producing this bomb, it's horrible. So I mean, it's an extremely complex topic. And we need to be open to dialogue and to listen also to the arguments of the others. And that because by just shouting, like saying, la, 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 you're crazy and we are right, this will not solve the problem. So this is what we're doing. We're talking. And of course, we're also putting political pressure on the topic. That's what I can say. And on this idea of the 5 nuclear sharing partners, I think the problem will not be there. I think the problem will be other NATO members, especially our friends in the East, our allies in Central Europe, and also, of course, the nuclear weapon states. But that's a good suggestion, but I have not thought it over, so I cannot comment on it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. The next questions that I identified as belonging together somehow are mostly going to Katja. So there's one question from Angelika Clausen. What will the Greens ask for in coalition talks after the election? And what would be the steps of a roadmap to end nuclear sharing in alliance with Belgium, the Netherlands, and maybe also Italy? And there's also a question from ICAN. Maybe you can just refer to that as well. As step on the right direction, should Germany and maybe also Belgium formally distance themselves from the lines in future NATO communiques which criticize the TPNW? And maybe a third question that is also connected to the question what the German government with the Green participation would do. The majority of Germans want to join the TPNW and understand the risks of nuclear weapons. Is the Green Party planning to join the TPNW? And if it will be building a government in a new parliament, what would be the position of the Greens there? And if we support the suggestion of the SPD, so the Social Democrat Party in Germany, to join the TPNW and observer status, and if yes, what we have done in this direction so far.
All right, well, what can we do? I mean, it's been said for the coalition treaty, we want to go for an observer status for the TPNW. I'm not sure. Well, the SPD right now is in government responsibility, but I haven't seen Heiko Maas say anything like that. So I'm not sure how reliable that is. But of course, if we have a coalition with the Social Democrats, it'll be a lot easier. That's what I think, to have an agreement on a roadmap towards joining the TMW. As I said, it will not be possible, in my view, to join it right away. But as Leo said, if there is a clear political path or a roadmap towards terminating nuclear sharing, then it would be possible. So, so the observer state would be what we would try to get into a coalition treaty, and to have a perspective possibly to end nuclear sharing in a period of 4 years. Should we distance from government position criticizing TPNW? Well, that's not easy to answer, because that probably depends on what paper you're talking about or what government position, because I think we should make it clear that we support the treaty, but that's probably a question about what if the government, a coalition government with probably maybe the conservatives, publish positions. I can't I haven't been in government responsibility yet. I don't know, maybe Frank can answer that question better, how to distance or how to make it clear that there is a different view among coalition partners to make that clear. I mean, of course, my position is clear, so I would try to do whatever we can to make clear that Green position is in support of TPNW. Yeah. So I guess that's things to come up. First of all, as I said, there's a majority in the public view. Yeah, that's what I hope for. I'd be very interested in seeing some more of the public, what Leo said about the numbers in other countries. That would be really helpful for the debate. But right now, the next 4 months, what we can do is to focus on, turning that majority in public opinion into not only in polls, but into results in the election, because that's the only way we can, realize the position that's majority. That's the focus for the next 4 months. And then we'll see how we go from there.
Thank you so much. Before we come to the final panel round with the closing remarks, I would like to ask you one question that was asked by Sahindra to all of you, and I don't know who wants to answer. And Sahindra asked, in an European perspective, can you imagine that Germany or Belgium may do isolated steps, for example, regarding nuclear participation, or do you see the need of including the Eastern European opinion, who are closer to the Russian border? I assume they are interested in a strong US-American involvement. And how can we get a constructive dialogue there? We have already mentioned that question a little bit, but maybe some of you wants to answer and add some thoughts to that. Who wants to go? Yeah, Frank, please.
Of course, it's in the NATO alliance, which is a defensive alliance. It's essential to look at the interests and also the positions of the Central European NATO member states. In this sense, I want to, because Leo was talking about deterrence. I mean, the thing is with defense, you cannot defend yourself only with defensive means. You need offensive means to defend yourself, to deter an attack. Belgium has experienced this, so we had defensive cyber capacity since many years, and we kept on being attacked. Belgium is attacked like non-stop. Like each week we have a cyber attack or a hack. And now in the new government agreement, we agreed that we will develop offensive cyber capacities, not to start attacking other countries, but just as let's say, a dissuasion for cyber attack, because it was really, we could not hold it anymore. So in a sense, in order to defend yourself, you need offensive capacities. Now, the problem with offensive capacities is that your adversary might interpret them as aggressive. So that's the whole difficulty with offensive capacities. But I think indeed you need offensive capacities. So you need deterrence in order to protect yourself. On Central Europe, well, I think they feel very threatened by a lot of Russian actions, but also Russian weaponry, also in Kaliningrad. So I think this whole idea of a nuclear weapon-free zone in Kaliningrad is a very good idea. And I think that we, Belgium, Germany, can play a role in contributing and putting elements on the table to achieve this by playing it smart and tactical also. So I'm absolutely not saying that we should not take into account the situation of our Eastern allies. But I also think, again, that the current status quo is also not safe. So we need to push ahead and we need to take action to reduce the nuclear risk.
Thank you so much. And now we are at the end of the discussion already. So I will ask you in the end, what's your conclusion from the 2 days debate? What is the follow-up and what's next? And how can we work together on that topic in the future? Maybe Leo, for a very, very quick statement, you go first, and then Katja, and then Frank.
No, thank you very much. Indeed, I try to keep it brief. I just wanted to reply briefly to Frank about the extremely important and really crucial aspect of trying to bridge the gaps in the debate. And this is something that we try to do a lot and for many years already. But of course, you also have to acknowledge that the gaps exist, right? And so far, the German government, the Belgian government, they were able to claim that they are working for a nuclear weapons-free world. And at the same time, they were trying to actively hinder the rest of the world to prohibit these weapons, right? And the German government still does not accept accountability for what they did on the TPNW, and they just want to be left alone, yeah? And now they claim it's impossible to join it. And I mean, the facts just are not there to make such a claim. Yes, it's going to be politically difficult. We acknowledge that, but you can't claim that it's impossible. They claim that there's no verification, or that verification would be weaker than the NPT, when the opposite is the case. At some point, after the 20th time that this has been debunked, it becomes a little bit difficult to take those arguments seriously each and every time. So I think when the UK increases the arsenal by 40%, we can be excused for saying that this might not have been done on the basis of a proper analysis. That's on that front. And then simply looking ahead, I think indeed the Social Democrats in Germany have put it into their manifesto for the elections. So I think the Greens have a very good basis to work on there and trying to get a consensus around at least being an observer in the next year. And then at the conference in Vienna, I think a lot of these gaps will be bridged. A lot of these arguments will be addressed on a substantive level. And again, we are not afraid of the debate. We believe that nuclear deterrence will have a very tough time to survive if you have an honest, transparent discussion based on empirical data about the value of these things. And so it's sometimes a bit difficult to have this kind of patience, because when you are trying to challenge the most powerful weapons on Earth, wielded by the most powerful countries on Earth, you do need a lot of insistence in order to get ahead. But now, with entry into force of the TPNW, I think time is on our side. And so now we also sometimes need a bit of patience in order to make sure that we can move these things ahead. So I think that's the positive note on which I would like to close. Thank you so much for organizing this event.
And thank you for your optimism. That is definitely needed. Katja, you go next for your closing remarks.
Well, patience might be needed, but of course, on the other side, we want to make clear that we have been very patient a long time already, and that things have to move. And people have to understand that if you vote Green and if you have Green in the government, it is an existential topic to us, and that we have a high credibility on this topic, and that we want to deliver, and we cannot wait forever. So this is I think the first point. And then on the other side, it's clear we don't want to go ahead unilateral just Germany, or if the question was Germany and Belgium, we want to have the more patience that we'll need a little bit more patience, because we're going to try to have as much support in NATO and in Europe as possible. But we will not wait forever, which means we're going to try, we're going to talk to our neighbors, talk to our allies, and try to have as many support as possible. But if we realize that, we are at the end of the process, then it might be clear that we are not gonna wait until everybody agrees on it. Then we'll have to take steps, just a group of willing states. We want things to happen. That has to be clear. And it'll be important, as I said, to talk to our Eastern partners. But when I talk to the counter arguments that I hear a lot towards our German Green position is, oh no, if German Greens want to leave nuclear sharing, the danger could be then that Belgium could have the same idea. So you are not allowed to leave because the danger could be that then Netherlands and Belgium could follow. So that's kind of absurd, because I say, well, of course, I would prefer to have a solution, a European solution with all of us. And if a European solution takes a little longer than a unilateral solution, it's still worth it, because the broader it is and the more support we have, the more it will, be a step towards a nuclear-free world. And that's the goal that we should, not lose from our view. This is the goal, and that's a good reason to try to take as many partners and many allies with us as we can.
Thank you so much. Frank, your last remark, please.
Yeah, just to support Katja, of course, it's preferable we're, in the EU, in NATO, but also globally, we're together. And the more we can do in dialogue together, the better. But we should not wait forever. So we need to talk. This is very important. Listen to each other, but we also need to act. And I think the two handgriffen, the nuclear sharing and the TPNW, are very good handgriffen tools to really push this debate and make sure that the status quo is broken and we move in the right direction.
Thank you so much. So you see, we have a lot in front of us, and we all know it's going to be a very rocky road, but we are very determined to walk it. And of course, by looking at the issue realistically and real politically, but with keeping the clear vision and will to end nuclear sharing and have a nuclear free world. In doing it in an international dialogue and getting people together to work for it. And of course, this today has been also a very small part of this international dialogue that we are currently doing. So thank you for being part of it, and also for your smart and concrete remarks, dear Katja, dear Frank, and dear Leo, and also, of course, to the audience for the smart questions and the participation. Yeah, and I'm sure that we will stay in the debate together, and we will keep fighting for it. And have a great afternoon. See you soon. And thank you for your participation again. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks to you, Jamila.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.